power seduces quietly. It doesn't arrive with warnings or consequences. It whispers instead soft, persuasive lies that tell powerful men they are different, exempt, untouchable, that the rules that bind ordinary people were never meant for them. Kevin Horton had listened to those whispers for years. At exactly 4:58 a.m., as the first pale light of dawn crept across the Manhattan skyline, Kevin stepped out of the private elevator and into the silence of his penthouse. The city below was just beginning to stir, delivery trucks groaning awake, streetlights blinking out one by one, the Hudson River reflecting a bruised gray sky. This was the hour Kevin usually loved most, the hour when the world felt paused, obedient, waiting for him to decide what happened next. He expected routine. He expected warmth. He expected forgiveness. Kevin loosened his tie as he walked, already rehearsing the lie he would tell if Briella happened to be awake. An emergency call from a West Coast investor. A last-minute issue with a defense contract. A crisis only he could solve. He had perfected the tone over the years, exhausted but heroic, inconvenienced but noble. The voice of a man sacrificing himself for the future. The lie was muscle memory now. But the penthouse wasn't just quiet. It was hollow. No soft lighting glowing from the kitchen. No faint sound of the espresso machine Briella programmed every morning. No footsteps from the bedroom. Even the air felt wrong cooler, stripped of the subtle floral warmth Briella always insisted on maintaining, no matter the season. Kevin slowed. Something tightened in his chest. An unfamiliar pressure he dismissed as irritation. "Briella?" he called, his voice echoing against glass and marble. Nothing answered. The silence pressed in, sterile and deliberate, like a room that had already been decided against him. Kevin moved farther inside, setting his phone down on the counter without looking at it. The kitchen was immaculate, too immaculate. The countertops bare. No breakfast tray, no folded newspaper waiting in its usual place. On the center island, where Briella usually left his coffee mug aligned perfectly with the edge, sat a single black envelope. It was thick, expensive, legal. Kevin frowned. He hadn't noticed the absence of staff yet, but now it registered the housekeeper, the overnight security rotation, the quiet hum of a life that revolved smoothly around him. All gone. As if the penthouse had been reset to neutral, Kevin picked up the envelope. His name was written in clean, confident handwriting. Kevin Horton. No pet name. No apology. Just his full name. He felt a flicker of annoyance. Briella had always been dramatic in subtle ways. He told himself this was probably some overreaction, some delayed emotional outburst he would smooth over later. He'd dealt with investors angrier than this, politicians more volatile. Briella had always come around. She always did. He carried the envelope upstairs, irritation trailing him like static. Their bedroom door stood open. The bed was made with hospital precision, the kind of sharp, intentional neatness Briella used only when she was preparing for guests or leaving for long trips. Kevin walked toward the closet, still not fully prepared for what he was about to see. His side was untouched. Suits lined in perfect order, shoes polished and spaced evenly, watches displayed like trophies. Briella's side was gone. Not packed hastily, not rummaged through, erased. The racks were bare, the shelves empty. Even the faint scent of her perfume, the one she'd worn for years because Kevin once said it reminded him of stability, had been deliberately removed. Kevin stopped breathing for a second. On her nightstand lay two things, her wedding ring and another black envelope. Kevin let out a short laugh, sharp and disbelieving. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, rubbing his temple. He picked up the ring first. It felt cold in his palm, heavy, lifeless. For the first time that morning, unease began to creep past his arrogance. He set the ring down and opened the envelope. The first page wasn't a letter. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't pleading. It was a filing. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Petitioner: Briella Horton. Respondent: Kevin Horton. Kevin sat down hard on the edge of the bed. The room tilted. He flipped the page. Then another. Photos slid into view, glossy, sharp, professional. Him. Jennifer. Entering buildings, leaving hotels. laughing in places he'd sworn were private. Timestamps, locations, patterns, not just one mistake, a history. Kevin's pulse roared in his ears as he turned page after page, denial draining away with every image. This wasn't suspicion. This wasn't emotion. This was evidence. His fingers trembled as he reached the next section. The prenuptial agreement, the one he'd insisted on years ago, confident in his lawyers, confident in his control. He skimmed until his eyes snagged on a clause he didn't remember approving. Infidelity nullifies asset protection. All marital intellectual property subject to redistribution. Kevin swallowed. His mind raced ahead faster than his heart could keep up. The patents, the algorithms, the early filings Briella had quietly helped structure when Horton Dynamics was still fragile, still becoming. His phone buzzed. Kevin barely noticed until it buzzed again. He grabbed it and dialed his COO. Straight to voicemail. His CFO, disconnected. The board chair answered on the third ring. "Kevin," the man said, voice flat. "You should check your email." Kevin opened his inbox. The emergency board meeting had already happened. It had been called at 2 a.m. by Briella's legal team. By sunrise, Kevin Horton was no longer CEO of Horton Dynamics, his access revoked, his shares frozen, his name removed from internal systems. Kevin stared at the screen, his reflection faintly visible in the dark glass, older than he remembered, smaller than he felt last night. Somewhere deep in his mind, a truth finally surfaced, slow and merciless. Briella hadn't left in anger. She had left in control. If stories where power collapses under its own arrogance pull you in, like this video, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. It helps us bring you more stories like this. Kevin Horton believed power made him untouchable, standing alone in his empty penthouse, divorce papers trembling in his hands. He was about to learn just how wrong he had been, and as the city fully woke below him, the quiet woman he thought he knew was already stepping into a life she had prepared for long before he ever noticed the silence. Silence is often mistaken for absence. In reality, it is presence without permission. Long before Kevin Horton stood alone in his hollow penthouse clutching divorce papers, Briella Horton had mastered the art of being underestimated. It was not something she learned accidentally. It was something she cultivated slowly, deliberately, because power paid closer attention to noise than to nuance. Every morning, Briella woke before Kevin, not because she had to, but because she liked the quiet hour before the city demanded its performance. She moved through the penthouse without urgency. Barefoot on marble floors, hair pulled back, robe tied loosely at her waist. She brewed coffee not because Kevin noticed, but because routines revealed patterns. And patterns, when watched long enough, became predictable. Kevin's mornings were chaos disguised as confidence. His phone buzzed before his eyes opened. Emails from Asia. Calls from Washington. Texts from people who needed him or wanted something from him. He moved fast, spoke loudly, filled rooms with his presence. He was always late, always important, always convinced the world waited for him. Briella watched. She noted the nights he didn't come home, the mornings he showered too quickly, the way his excuses evolved as his confidence grew. Early on, the lies had been clumsy. Over time, they became polished, rehearsed, almost respectful in their audacity. She never confronted him. That was the first thing people misunderstood. They assumed silence meant ignorance. That she didn't see, didn't know, didn't want to disturb the fragile ecosystem of wealth she lived inside. Friends hinted. Acquaintances whispered. Even Kevin, in moments of careless honesty, once joked at a dinner party, "Briella lives in her own world. She doesn't pay attention to this stuff." He said it with a smile. She returned it politely. In truth, Briella paid attention to everything. She noticed how Kevin introduced her at events. "Never, Briella. Never, my wife, the strategist. Never, the woman who helped structure our early IP filings. Always just, my wife." 2 words. Neat. Diminishing. She stood beside him in tailored dresses chosen to blend into the background, her posture relaxed, her expression pleasant. While Kevin dominated conversations, Briella listened. She listened to what was said and, more importantly, to what wasn't. She listened to investors talk freely in her presence because they assumed she didn't understand, to executives who underestimated her because she didn't interrupt, to politicians who ignored her because she didn't demand attention. And she remembered everything. There was a time years earlier when Briella might have corrected them. Before Kevin, before Horton dynamics, before she learned that being visible was not the same as being powerful. Briella had once been different. In another life, she had been sharp-edged and direct. The kind of woman who spoke with precision and expected to be heard. She had worked in corporate acquisitions straight out of graduate school, navigating hostile boardrooms with a calm confidence that unsettled men twice her age. She understood contracts intuitively. She read footnotes the way others skimmed headlines. When she married Kevin, people assumed she had stepped down. What they never asked was whether she had simply stepped back. She gave up her career publicly. Quietly. She kept her skills polished. She read financial disclosures over morning coffee, reviewed legal updates while Kevin slept, attended charity boards that doubled as intelligence hubs. She never competed with Kevin's spotlight. She didn't need it. Kevin liked to believe Briella had chosen comfort over ambition, that she had traded sharpness for softness, that her calm was contentment. In public, he dismissed her with familiarity. At a gala once, when a venture capitalist asked Briella about her background, Kevin laughed lightly and said, "She used to do some consulting stuff. Nothing serious. Now she manages me." The table laughed. Briella smiled, but her eyes flicked, briefly, to Kevin's left hand, the one that always twitched when he felt too secure. That night she wrote a note in her phone. Not emotional, just factual. She had learned early that emotion clouded memory. Facts didn't. Kevin never noticed the small changes in her behavior over the years. The way she asked fewer questions. The way she stopped seeking reassurance. The way she began to observe instead of engage. He mistook peace for surrender. He mistook patience for passivity. What Kevin never understood was that Briella had stopped reacting because reactions gave power away. When she discovered his first affair years ago, it wasn't through a dramatic revelation. It was a pattern, a calendar inconsistency, a receipt that didn't match a story. She sat with the knowledge quietly for weeks, letting it settle, letting it clarify. She didn't cry. She didn't confront. She asked herself one question instead. If this continues, what will I need? From that moment on, Briella shifted. She didn't withdraw from Kevin's world, she embedded deeper into it. She attended more events, sat in on more dinners, paid closer attention to conversations that had nothing to do with her. She asked questions framed as curiosity, never suspicion. Kevin's arrogance did the rest. He spoke freely around her, took calls in the same room, left documents unattended, assumed her presence meant safety. She never corrected him. There were moments, quiet ones, when Kevin sensed something he couldn't name, a distance that wasn't cold, but resolved. He dismissed it quickly. Powerful men rarely question comfort. He preferred Jennifer's intensity anyway. Jennifer demanded attention. Briella offered none. Jennifer made him feel desired. Briella made him feel secure, and Kevin, blinded by his own excess, failed to understand the difference. Briella began to document, not obsessively, not emotionally, methodically. Dates, patterns, financial inconsistencies, small discrepancies that told larger stories. She consulted no one at first. She didn't rush. She waited. Restraint was her greatest weapon. There was a moment, months before everything ended, when Kevin returned home late and found Briella in the living room reading. He kissed her cheek absently, already halfway to his phone. "You're quiet tonight," he said. She looked up, met his eyes, and smiled softly. "I always am." Kevin laughed and walked away. He never asked what she was reading. He never noticed the legal journal beside her novel. He never wondered why her silence felt heavier than usual. By the time Kevin Horton believed his life was unraveling, Briella Horton had already completed her calculations. She had weighed outcomes, measured consequences, and chosen timing. Her silence was never submission. It was preparation. And as Kevin stood alone in the ruins of his certainty, Briella was already several steps ahead, calm, composed, and finally visible only to those who knew where to look. The woman in the shadows had never been lost. She had been waiting. Jennifer liked to be seen. Not in the careless way, she was far too intentional for that, but in the way that made people turn their heads twice, uncertain why they were suddenly paying attention. She understood light, angles, proximity. She understood how rooms worked, how men worked, and Kevin Horton worked best when he felt admired. They met the way powerful men often met temptation at the edge of boredom. A networking event disguised as a charity dinner. A glass-walled venue overlooking the city. Kevin had arrived late, distracted, already irritated by the evening's obligations. Jennifer noticed him immediately. She always did. Jennifer was younger than Kevin, but not naive. Her ambition burned hot and fast, sharpened by the knowledge that time favored no one. She had worked her way through rooms where doors opened slowly and closed without explanation. She had learned early that talent alone wasn't enough, you needed leverage. Kevin was leverage. She didn't approach him directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she let herself be introduced. Let the conversation circle naturally. Let Kevin feel as though he had discovered her. He liked that illusion. Kevin told himself Jennifer was different from the others, that she wasn't impressed by his money or his influence. Even as she listened carefully whenever he spoke, she asked questions that made him feel intelligent. She laughed at the right moments. She never interrupted. With Jennifer, Kevin felt something he hadn't felt in years. Unquestioned. At home, Briella's silence carried weight. It asked nothing, but it demanded awareness. With Jennifer, silence was flirtation. Space to be filled by Kevin's voice. His opinions. His stories. His version of himself as a man still ascending. Jennifer mirrored him expertly. She praised without worship, challenged without threatening. She made Kevin feel necessary. "You don't realize how rare that is," he once told her, leaning against the edge of her desk late one evening. "People don't see the pressure. They just see the title." Jennifer smiled softly. That must be exhausting. It was exactly the answer he wanted. What Kevin never questioned was why Jennifer always listened more than she spoke when conversations turned serious. Why she asked about timelines, about future projects, about board dynamics and ownership structures. Jennifer wasn't collecting feelings. She was collecting information. The night Kevin stayed with her that night had been inevitable. A slow accumulation of glances and excuses that made resistance feel unnecessary. The city outside the office windows glowed in muted golds and blues. Traffic far below moving like something distant and harmless. They stood close. Close enough to share breath. Close enough for Kevin to feel young again. Jennifer's confidence was different from Briella's. Briella's had been quiet, rooted, immovable. Jennifer's was fluid, adaptive, responsive. It made Kevin feel powerful in a way that felt earned, not assumed. When they finally closed the door behind them, it wasn't frantic. It was deliberate, controlled. Kevin noticed how Jennifer set her phone face down without being asked, how she paused, just long enough to let him lead. He mistook calculation for chemistry. Later, as the city slipped toward morning, Kevin lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling something close to triumph. Jennifer rested against him, her breathing even, one hand resting lightly on his chest. It felt intimate, affirming. He told himself this was freedom, that he had earned this, that after years of responsibility and restraint, he deserved something uncomplicated. Jennifer shifted, propping herself up on one elbow, studying him in the half-light. "So," she said casually, "what happens now?" Kevin smiled, already confident in the answer. "Now? Nothing changes." She raised an eyebrow. "Nothing?" "Nothing that needs to," he replied. "I take care of things." Jennifer didn't press. She never did. But her eyes lingered, searching his face for something more concrete. "I don't like being hidden," she said eventually. Not accusing. Just honest. Kevin brushed a thumb along her arm. "You won't be." It was a promise he believed because he wanted to. Jennifer nodded slowly, filing the response away. She had heard enough to understand where she stood. Not a partner. Not yet. But not disposable either. At least, not in Kevin's mind. Kevin dressed quietly before dawn, fastening his watch with practiced ease. He caught his reflection in the glass, relaxed, satisfied, certain. The city beyond the window waited, obedient as ever. Jennifer watched him from the bed. "You'll call?" "Of course," he said without hesitation. "I always do." He leaned down, pressed a brief kiss to her forehead. Controlled, affectionate, final. As Kevin stepped into the hallway, jacket slung over his shoulder, he felt lighter than he had in months. Reborn, he told himself. Untethered. He didn't notice Jennifer's expression change once the door closed, didn't see her reach for her phone, didn't hear the quiet exhale she released as she stared at the ceiling. Jennifer Horton, no relation. She'd once joked, didn't believe in accidents. She believed in positioning, in opportunity, in knowing when to wait and when to advance. Kevin believed he controlled the narrative. That was his first mistake. As he rode the elevator down, already rehearsing the lie he would tell if necessary, Kevin felt invincible. The world made sense again. Power hummed in his veins, steady and reassuring. He didn't know that the woman he'd just left behind and the woman waiting at home shared one critical trait. They were both watching him, and only one of them had already decided how this would end. Kevin stepped into the early morning air, convinced he still held every advantage. By the time the sun rose fully over Manhattan, that belief would begin to cost him everything. Kevin arrived home just before dawn. The private elevator opened directly into the penthouse, as it always had, with a quiet, efficient hum that reminded him how insulated his life was from the rest of the city. The lights came on automatically, bathing the marble floors and glass walls in a soft, neutral glow. Outside, Manhattan stretched awake in muted grays and silvers, the skyline blurred by early morning haze. Kevin loosened his tie as he stepped inside, already shifting into the rhythm of return. He checked his phone out of habit, scanning overnight messages, skimming headlines. The world had not collapsed while he was gone. Markets held steady. His name still carried weight. Everything was fine. He expected the low murmur of movement, the distant sounds of staff finishing their rounds, the faint clink of a cup in the kitchen, the subtle signs of a home already awake. Briella often rose early. She liked the quiet before the city asserted itself. But the penthouse was silent, not the peaceful silence of sleep, the deliberate silence of absence. Kevin paused near the entrance, his hand still resting on the strap of his watch. He frowned, irritation prickling at the edge of his thoughts. Perhaps Briella had gone for an early walk. She did that sometimes. Perhaps the staff had been given the morning off. He took another step forward. The air felt different, cooler, sterile, as though the space had been left untouched for hours longer than it should have been. "Briella?" He called out casually, not yet willing to attach concern to the sound of her name. Nothing answered. His footsteps echoed as he moved deeper into the penthouse. The kitchen was spotless, unnaturally so. The espresso machine sat idle, cold. No cup waited beside it. No folded newspaper rested on the counter. The island, usually arranged with careful symmetry, was bare except for a single object placed dead center on the marble surface. A black envelope. Kevin stopped walking. The envelope was thick, the paper heavy enough to hold its shape. His name was written across the front in Briella's handwriting, precise, confident, stripped of affection. Kevin Horton. He stared at it for a long moment, annoyance surfacing first. Briella had always had a flair for subtle drama. This felt like one of those gestures, symbolic, unnecessary, easily resolved with a conversation later. He didn't touch it. Instead, he continued upstairs. The staircase felt longer than usual, the silence following him step by step. At the top, the bedroom door stood open. Kevin frowned again. Briella never left it that way. The room was immaculate. Too immaculate. The bed was made with sharp hospital corners. The curtains were drawn to identical lengths. The surfaces cleared of the personal touches. Briella usually insisted on keeping books stacked neatly, her reading glasses resting beside the lamp. Kevin crossed the room and went straight to the closet. His side was untouched. Suits hung in perfect order, color-coded and pressed. shoes lined up with military precision, watches displayed exactly where he'd left them. Briella's side was empty, not disorganized, not hastily packed. Empty. The hangers were gone, the shelves bare. Even the faint imprint of her presence, the subtle indentation of shoes, the lingering scent of her perfume had been erased. Kevin's chest tightened. This wasn't a weekend trip. This wasn't a disagreement. This was deliberate. He turned slowly, scanning the room as if Briella might suddenly materialize, amused at his confusion. His eyes landed on the nightstand on her side of the bed. 2 objects rested there, her wedding ring, and another black envelope. Kevin laughed under his breath. A short, disbelieving sound that echoed too loudly in the empty room. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. Running a hand through his hair, he picked up the ring first. It was cold in his palm, heavier than he remembered. The diamond caught the early light, brilliant and lifeless at the same time. For a fleeting moment, something unfamiliar brushed against his certainty, a thin edge of doubt. He immediately pushed aside. Briella was dramatic. Yes, but she was also reasonable. He set the ring down and picked up the envelope. It felt heavier than the one downstairs. Kevin didn't open it right away. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the envelope as though it might speak first. This was a misunderstanding. A message. A negotiation tactic. He had handled crises larger than this before breakfast. He broke the seal. The first page slid out smoothly, crisp and impersonal. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't emotional. It was legal. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Petitioner, Briella Horton. Respondent, Kevin Horton. Kevin's breath caught. He read it again, slower this time, as though the words might rearrange themselves if given the chance. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Divorce. The word felt foreign, incompatible with the life he had constructed so carefully. He flipped the page. Photographs. High resolution. Professionally taken. Him and Jennifer entering buildings, leaving hotels, sitting close in places Kevin had believed were private. Timestamps. Locations. Dates. Not one mistake. A pattern. Kevin's pulse began to race as he turned page after page, disbelief giving way to a creeping, unwelcome awareness. This wasn't suspicion. This wasn't emotion. This was preparation. His fingers trembled as he reached the final section. The prenuptial agreement. The document he had insisted on years ago, confident in his lawyers, confident in his leverage. He skimmed automatically, already irritated until his eyes caught on a clause he didn't remember approving. Infidelity nullifies asset protection. All marital intellectual property subject to redistribution. Kevin froze. The room seemed to tilt, the edges blurring as his mind raced ahead of his body. The patents, the early filings, the algorithms Briella had quietly helped structure when Horton Dynamics was still vulnerable. His phone buzzed in his hand. Kevin barely noticed. The world he believed he controlled had just shifted beneath his feet, and he hadn't even reached the final page yet. He stared down at the documents, the silence of the penthouse pressing in around him, heavier now, charged with consequence. And as his fingers tightened around the envelope, Kevin Horton felt something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. Kevin sat very still. The bed beneath him felt suddenly unfamiliar, like furniture in a hotel room, temporary, unclaimed. The documents lay spread across his lap and the mattress beside him, their edges unnervingly neat. Briella had always been precise. He had once admired that about her. Now, the precision felt surgical. He told himself to breathe. Divorce papers could be contested. Photos could be explained. Lawyers existed for a reason. He had built an empire navigating pressure. This was simply another negotiation. That was the last lie arrogance tried to sell him. Kevin lifted the stack again, forcing himself to look properly this time. Not as a husband. Not as a man offended. As a CEO. The first section was the petition itself, clinical, restrained, devoid of drama. No accusations in bold letters, no emotional language. Just facts, dates, and legal grounding. Briella Horton sought dissolution of marriage on the basis of repeated infidelity and breach of marital agreement. Repeated. The word landed heavier than the rest. Kevin turned the page. The photos began again. Not just Jennifer. Other women appeared. Some faces he recognized immediately. Others less clearly, moments he had long ago dismissed as forgettable, harmless, compartmentalized. A dinner here. A hotel lobby there. A hand resting too familiarly at a corporate retreat. Each image accompanied by a caption printed in crisp, unembellished text. Date. Time. Location. Coordinates included where relevant. Hotel names spelled out in full. Even room numbers in some cases. Kevin's throat tightened. This wasn't a jealous spouse rifling through a phone. This was a dossier. He flipped pages faster now, panic creeping in despite his effort to suppress it. The further he went, the worse it became. Patterns emerged, travel routes he favored. The timing of his late meetings. The way his affairs rotated with almost mathematical predictability. Someone had been watching him for a long time. Someone patient. There were images taken from angles he didn't remember seeing, reflections in glass, distant vantage points. Moments captured just outside his field of awareness. The timestamps weren't estimates. They were precise to the second. Kevin's mind raced. How long? Weeks? Months? Years? A cold realization settled in his chest. Briella hadn't discovered everything at once. She had discovered him slowly, methodically. He reached the end of the photo section and felt a brief, foolish flicker of relief until he saw the tabbed divider that followed. Appendix A. Pattern analysis. Kevin's hand shook as he turned the page. Charts. Graphs. A timeline mapping his movements against financial records, corporate travel, and personal expenditures. His expenses flagged, cross-referenced, annotated. Notes in the margins, not emotional, not accusatory, simply explanatory. Expense classified as client entertainment. No client present. Travel billed to corporate development. Personal companion confirmed. Hotel stay inconsistent with stated meeting schedule. Kevin's stomach dropped. This wasn't about betrayal. This was about exposure. He had always believed discretion was enough. That money covered mistakes. That power softened consequences. He had never imagined Briella would connect the dots, not emotionally, but operationally. He flipped to the next section. The prenuptial agreement. The document felt familiar, comforting even. He remembered insisting on it. Remembered the satisfaction of control. The reassurance that no matter what happened, his assets were protected. He scanned quickly, confident this would be where her case weakened. Then his eyes caught on the clause again. Section 14.3. Infidelity provision. He read it slowly now. In the event of proven infidelity by either party, all marital protections afforded by this agreement are rendered void. Assets acquired during the marriage, including intellectual property developed or co-developed, are subject to equitable redistribution. Kevin stared at the page. Equitable. Redistribution. The words echoed, hollow and dangerous. His mind leapt ahead to the implications he had been avoiding. Horton dynamics had grown explosively during the first years of their marriage. Early patents, preliminary algorithms, strategic filings Briella had helped structure quietly, efficiently while he had focused on expansion and visibility. He had insisted her name remain on certain documents for tax efficiency. A technicality, a mistake. Kevin leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the papers sliding slightly but never losing their alignment. Briella had prepared this carefully, not just to win but to leave no opening. This wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a legal ambush. For the first time, a deeper fear surfaced, one that had nothing to do with his marriage. If she had evidence of infidelity tied to corporate misuse of funds, if the timeline analysis held, if the documentation extended beyond personal misconduct. Kevin swallowed. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered. Kevin, came the voice of his board chair, clipped and unfamiliar. You need to check your email. Immediately. The call ended before Kevin could respond. He didn't need to open the message to know. The room felt smaller now. The penthouse pressing in on him. Its luxury suddenly obscene. Every polished surface reflected a version of himself he no longer recognized, no longer controlled. Kevin Horton. Untouchable. Kevin Horton, architect of his own exposure. He gathered the documents into a single stack, hands no longer steady, and placed them carefully back into the envelope. The weight of it felt greater now, as though it carried not just paper but consequence. This wasn't about fixing things. This wasn't about forgiveness. This was about survival. Kevin stood, pacing the room, his thoughts no longer orderly but frantic. He needed counsel, damage control, time, but somewhere, beneath the panic, a harsher truth took hold. He was no longer negotiating from power. He was being hunted, and the woman he had dismissed for years had planned every step with the patience of someone who understood that silence, wielded correctly, was the sharpest weapon of all. Kevin didn't remember sitting down. One moment he was standing in the bedroom, the evidence file heavy in his hands, and the next he was seated at the desk in his home office, staring at his laptop as though it had betrayed him. The penthouse felt smaller now, the walls closer, the silence sharper. He reached for his phone again. This time he didn't hesitate. He called his chief operating officer first. Straight to voicemail. No greeting. No explanation. Just the dull, automated certainty of absence. Kevin frowned and immediately dialed his chief financial officer. The call rang longer this time, 4 rings, 5 before cutting off abruptly. Disconnected. That shouldn't have been possible. He tried again. Same result. A flicker of irritation burned through the fear. People didn't ignore Kevin Horton. Not executives who owed their positions to him. Not men who had risen under his shadow. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb moving faster now. Head of legal. No answer. Chief of staff. Voicemail. Each unanswered call tightened the pressure in his chest. Kevin stood abruptly, pacing the length of the office, phone pressed to his ear as if proximity might force compliance. Then he called the board chair again. The line connected instantly. "Kevin," the man said, his voice stripped of warmth. "You should already know what's happening." Kevin stopped pacing. "What's happening is my wife is playing games," he snapped. "And you're not answering your phone." There was a pause on the other end. Long enough to feel intentional. "This isn't a game," the board chair replied. "And it stopped being personal hours ago." "What does that mean?" Kevin demanded. "It means," the man said evenly, "that an emergency board meeting was convened at 2 o'clock this morning." Kevin laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "At 2 in the morning? Without me?" "Yes. You don't have the authority." "We did." The board chair cut in. "Because the request didn't come from you. It came from legal counsel representing a significant shareholder." Kevin's stomach dropped. "Which shareholder?" he asked, though something in him already knew. The pause stretched again. Briella Horton. The name landed like a physical blow. Kevin felt the room tilt, the polished calm of his office suddenly foreign. "She's my wife," he said automatically. "She has nothing to do with corporate governance." "She has everything to do with it," the board chair replied. Her legal team presented documentation. Extensive documentation. Kevin clenched his jaw. "You didn't even hear my side." "There is no side to hear," the man said. "There are records, timelines, evidence of fiduciary breaches." Kevin stopped breathing for a moment. "You're talking about private matters," he said tightly. "Marital disputes." "No," the board chair corrected. "We're talking about misuse of corporate funds, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and violations of governance clauses you signed." Kevin's hand tightened around the phone. "This is absurd. I built this company, and you were entrusted to lead it," the board chair replied. "Those are not the same thing." Kevin opened his mouth to argue, to remind them who he was, what he represented, but the words stalled. For the first time in his career, authority did not respond to volume. "You should check your email," the man said again. "The decision has already been documented." The call ended. Kevin stood frozen, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to nothing. He turned slowly toward his desk and opened his laptop. The email sat at the top of his inbox, flagged urgent. Emergency Board Resolution Horton Dynamics. His cursor hovered for a fraction of a second before he clicked. The language was precise. Cold. Final. Effective immediately, Kevin Horton was relieved of his duties as chief executive officer pending further investigation. His access to company systems was suspended, his voting rights temporarily frozen, his shares placed under review. Kevin read it twice, then a third time. The words did not change. His phone buzzed again, this time with alerts. System notifications. One after another. Access revoked. Credentials invalid. Security permissions removed. Kevin tried to log into the company network. Denied. He attempted his executive dashboard. Error. He refreshed his email. A new message appeared. Media inquiry, request comment on executive removal. Kevin's breath came shallow now, fast and unsteady. How? He whispered to the empty room. The answer arrived almost immediately. Another email. This one copied to the board. Legal counsel and compliance. Notice of legal representation counsel for Briella Horton. He skimmed quickly. Briella's legal team had initiated proceedings not just for divorce, but for corporate review. The documentation she submitted tied personal misconduct to corporate exposure, drawing a clean, devastating line between the two. This wasn't collateral damage. This was alignment. Kevin slumped into his chair, the weight of realization pressing down hard. Briella hadn't acted emotionally. She had acted strategically, positioning herself not as a wronged spouse, but as a stakeholder protecting value. The irony burned. He had always dismissed her presence in meetings, always assumed her silence meant detachment. She had been listening. Another notification flashed across his screen. Trading halt Horton Dynamics. Pending investigation. Kevin's vision blurred. His phone rang again, this time from a number he didn't recognize. Kevin Horton? A woman's voice asked crisply when he answered. Yes, this is Claire Donovan with Global Finance News. Can you confirm reports that you've been removed as CEO effective this morning? Kevin closed his eyes. The story was already out. I have no comment, he said, his voice sounding distant even to himself. The call ended. Another replaced it almost immediately. Then another. He dropped the phone onto the desk. Somewhere between the unanswered calls and the media alerts, something fundamental shifted inside him. The confidence that had once defined him, the certainty that he could fix anything with enough force fractured. He was no longer directing events. He was reacting to them. Kevin stared at the wall opposite his desk, his mind racing through damage control scenarios that grew thinner by the second. Lawyers? Statements? Negotiations? Then he remembered the patents, the early filings, the ones Briella's name appeared on. He turned back to the laptop, heart hammering, and opened the final attachment in the board's email. Intellectual property review, preliminary findings. His eyes scanned the document, dread pooling low and heavy. Several core patents were listed, flagged. Co-developed assets, subject to reassessment. Kevin's breath caught as he read the final line. Ownership under review. Transfer pending adjudication. The words echoed in his mind, hollow and absolute. The patents were no longer his. And as the sun rose fully over Manhattan, casting light into a penthouse that no longer belonged to him in any way that mattered, Kevin Horton finally understood the truth. This wasn't a fall. It was an execution. Kevin Horton had spent years believing he understood his wife. That belief was the most expensive mistake of his life. Long before Horton Dynamics became a name whispered with reverence in boardrooms, before Kevin learned to command rooms with a glance and a pause, Briella had already mastered the mechanics of power. She just hadn't needed an audience. She learned early that acquisitions weren't about aggression. They were about patience. Briella's career began quietly, far from press releases and stock tickers. She worked behind the scenes in corporate acquisition teams that never appeared on stage, but always determined the outcome. She learned how companies were dismantled without noise, how leverage was built in increments too small for arrogance to notice. She learned where men like Kevin looked and where they didn't. When she met Kevin, he was brilliant and hungry, overflowing with ambition and blind spots in equal measure. He talked endlessly about scale, about disruption, about becoming indispensable. Briella listened, recognizing both the potential and the danger in that kind of confidence. She admired his drive. She did not mistake it for wisdom. In the early days of Horton Dynamics, when the company was still fragile, Briella had helped more than Kevin ever acknowledged. She read drafts of filings late at night while he slept, asked questions he waved off as unnecessary, flagged risks he assumed would resolve themselves. When Kevin insisted her name be included on early patent filings for efficiency, he'd said Briella hadn't argued. She had simply made sure the language was precise. That precision would matter later. Kevin never noticed her contributions because he never looked for them. He saw Briella as supportive, not strategic. Present, not participatory. When she stopped offering opinions, he felt relieved. Less resistance, less explanation. What he didn't understand was that Briella hadn't stopped thinking. She had stopped volunteering. Her emotional restraint, another trait Kevin misunderstood, was never indifference. It was discipline. Briella believed that emotion without leverage was a liability. She allowed herself to feel privately, fully. But she acted publicly only when action served purpose. When she first confirmed Kevin's infidelity, she felt the pain sharply. The betrayal cut deep, not because of the act itself, but because of the arrogance behind it. The assumption that she wouldn't notice, wouldn't understand, wouldn't respond. She cried once, alone. Then she asked herself what came next. Revenge was tempting, but it was messy, loud, temporary. Justice required structure. Briella didn't want Kevin to suffer emotionally. She wanted him to understand consequences, to face the systems he believed he controlled and realize they did not answer to him. So she waited. She waited while Kevin grew careless, while patterns repeated, while evidence accumulated naturally, without interference. She waited because the truth, left alone long enough, always expanded. She didn't confront him because confrontation would have changed his behavior, made him cautious, reduced his exposure. Instead, she let him continue. She watched as his lies became smoother, his confidence broader, his risk tolerance reckless. She watched him misuse resources he believed were his by right. She watched him blur personal desire and corporate authority. And she documented. Not obsessively, not emotionally, professionally. She kept records the way she once had in acquisition rooms, clean, verifiable, undeniable. She consulted legal experts quietly, under the guise of philanthropic work. She asked hypothetical questions framed as intellectual curiosity. She never rushed. Timing, she knew, was everything. When she finally moved, it wasn't because she was angry. It was because the case was complete. The difference between revenge and justice is intent. Revenge seeks pain. Justice seeks resolution. Briella didn't want to destroy Kevin. She wanted to end the imbalance. By the time Kevin opened that black envelope, everything was already in motion. Legal counsel retained. Documentation reviewed. Corporate governance triggered. No dramatic ultimatums. No threats. Just execution. Kevin's blindness to her intellect wasn't accidental, it was cultivated by his own ego. He believed intelligence announced itself loudly. That power demanded recognition. That silence meant absence. Briella understood something Kevin never had. Real power doesn't ask to be seen. It waits. And when it moves, it does so without apology. As Kevin scrambled to salvage control, Briella moved forward calmly, her life already reorganized around clarity instead of compromise. She didn't look back. There was nothing left to negotiate. The man she had married no longer existed, not because she erased him, but because he had finally been forced to confront the truth of himself. And for the first time since the beginning, Briella Horton stepped fully into the open, not as a wife, not as a shadow, but as a woman who had always known exactly what she was doing. Kevin didn't go to Jennifer because he loved her. He went because she was the last place where he still felt seen. The penthouse no longer felt safe. Every room echoed with Briella's absence, with reminders of decisions he could no longer undo. His phone wouldn't stop vibrating, calls from journalists, messages from lawyers, alerts he didn't have the courage to open. Jennifer's apartment, by contrast, represented something simpler, familiar, controlled, or so he believed. He didn't call ahead. He told himself it was better that way. Less time for questions, less opportunity for hesitation. He arrived mid-morning, sunglasses pulled low, collar turned up, the city already buzzing with rumors he hadn't yet heard aloud. Jennifer opened the door slowly. Her expression shifted the moment she saw his face. "What's going on?" she asked, stepping back to let him in. Kevin didn't answer immediately. He dropped his jacket onto a chair, loosened his tie with hands that still remembered authority. "Everything's fine," he said automatically. "There's just noise." Jennifer didn't smile. Her apartment was unusually quiet. Her phone lay face up on the table, screen lit. Kevin glanced at it instinctively and saw his own name staring back at him in bold letters. Breaking. Horton Dynamics CEO, removed amid investigation. His stomach tightened. Jennifer followed his gaze. "You didn't tell me this could happen," she said. Kevin turned toward her, irritation flaring. "This is temporary. Board politics." "My wife." "Your wife?" Jennifer interrupted sharply. "This says your wife initiated the investigation." Kevin hesitated. It was a small pause. Barely noticeable. But Jennifer noticed. She crossed her arms, the warmth draining from her posture. "Kevin," she said slowly, "are they looking into company finances?" He didn't answer. Her jaw tightened. "Did you use corporate funds?" Kevin exhaled sharply. "It's complicated." Jennifer stepped back as though he'd moved toward her. "No," she said. "It's not. Either my name is anywhere near this or it isn't." Kevin felt something slip, then something fragile, final. "You're not involved," he said. "You won't be." Jennifer let out a short laugh. "That's not what the articles are saying." She picked up her phone and scrolled, reading aloud without looking at him. "Sources confirm multiple personal relationships tied to misuse of executive privileges." Her voice faltered. Kevin watched the realization settle over her face, the calculation replacing affection. "Kevin," she said quietly, "did you put anything in my name?" He opened his mouth to deny it. Stopped. She saw the truth before he spoke. "Oh my God," she whispered. "My lease. The travel. The dinners." "They were categorized correctly," Kevin said quickly. "I handled it." Jennifer shook her head. "Handled it doesn't mean protected." She moved away from him, pacing now, phone pressed to her ear as she scrolled again. "If my name appears in any filings, my career is over. Do you understand that?" Kevin stepped toward her. "Jennifer, listen to me. This will blow over." She turned sharply. "You don't know that." Silence stretched between them, thick and unforgiving. "This was never supposed to be like this," she said finally. "You said you had control." "I do," Kevin snapped. "I just need time." Jennifer stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for the man she thought she knew. The powerful one, the protected one, the certainty she'd attached herself to. She didn't find him. Instead, she saw risk. Exposure, a liability. "I can't do this," she said, her voice steady now. "I can't be associated with you." Kevin felt a cold sensation spread through his chest. "You don't mean that." "I do," she replied. "This," she gestured between them, "was based on a version of you that doesn't exist anymore." He laughed bitterly. "So, that's it?" Jennifer didn't flinch. "That's it." She walked to the door and opened it. Kevin stared at her, disbelief flickering across his face. "After everything, there was never everything," she said. "There was access, and it's gone." The words landed harder than any accusation. Kevin stood frozen as Jennifer waited, her expression unreadable but resolved. There was no anger in her eyes, no cruelty, just distance. He stepped past her, the hallway outside suddenly unfamiliar. As the door closed behind him, the sound echoed louder than it should have. Final. Kevin didn't move for several seconds. Then he walked, out into the city, alone. For the first time in his adult life, there was no one to call. No assistant to manage fallout. No partner to reassure him. No lover to soften the edges. The illusion had held as long as money did, and when the money vanished, so did the love. Kevin Horton walked through Manhattan unseen, unimportant, carrying nothing but the weight of consequences he could no longer outrun. And somewhere above him, in a life already rearranged without him, Briella Horton moved forward without looking back. Kevin returned to the building because he didn't know where else to go. Jennifer's door had closed with a finality he couldn't argue against, and the streets offered no answers, only movement. He walked without direction at first, his phone heavy in his pocket, unread alerts vibrating like reminders of a life still unraveling without his consent. The penthouse had always been his anchor. His name was etched into the building's systems, his presence assumed, his authority unquestioned. If anything still belonged to him, surely it was that. He approached from the east entrance, head down, collar raised. The building rose ahead of him, glass and steel catching the late morning light, indifferent to his return. For a moment, Kevin felt a flicker of relief. The familiar sight steadied him. Then he noticed the crowd. A cluster of people stood across the street, phones raised, voices overlapping. A news van idled near the curb, its satellite dish angled skyward. Another pulled in behind it. Kevin slowed. Security had changed. The doormen he recognized were gone, replaced by men in darker suits, their posture rigid, eyes scanning rather than welcoming. Uniformed officers stood near the entrance, their presence unmistakable. Kevin's pulse quickened. He stepped forward. One of the security guards raised a hand. "Sir." Kevin stopped, incredulous. "I live here." The guard didn't flinch. "Name?" Kevin stared at him. "Kevin Horton." The guard glanced at a tablet, fingers moving quickly. His expression didn't change. "I'm sorry, sir," he said. "You're not cleared for entry." The words hit harder than Kevin expected. "That's ridiculous," Kevin snapped. "I own—" "Sir," the guard interrupted, still calm. "You need to step back." A murmur rippled through the small crowd across the street. Someone recognized him. Phones tilted. Whispers spread. "That's him. The CEO. The one who got fired." Kevin felt heat rise to his face. "This is a mistake," he said, lowering his voice. "Call building management." "They've already been notified," the guard replied. "Please step away from the entrance." Kevin laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "You can't be serious." Behind him, a camera shutter clicked, then another. Kevin turned slightly and saw reporters edging closer, microphones ready, curiosity sharpened by the unmistakable scent of collapse. "Mr. Horton," a voice called out. "Can you confirm reports?" Kevin stepped back instinctively, his mind racing. This wasn't supposed to be public. Not yet. Not like this. He had imagined damage control in private offices, negotiations behind closed doors. He had not imagined standing on the sidewalk like a trespasser, his own building denying him entry. Another guard moved closer, positioning himself subtly between Kevin and the entrance. The message was clear. "You do not belong here." Kevin's phone buzzed again. He didn't look. A woman near the front of the crowd whispered loudly enough for him to hear, "That's him. He used to live up there." Used to. The words settled deep, heavy, and irreversible. Kevin stepped farther back, the distance between him and the doors widening with every reluctant movement. He felt exposed now, stripped of the invisible armor status once provided. Without assistance, without security of his own, he was just another man in an expensive coat noticeable only because of the fall. He glanced down at his wrist. The watch was still there. Heavy, familiar. For the first time it felt absurd. A symbol without power. A man nearby nudged his companion and murmured, "Guess money can't buy everything." Kevin clenched his jaw. He told himself this was temporary. A misunderstanding. A phase. But the building stood unmoved, silent and final. Then the street shifted. A low murmur rolled through the crowd as black sedans pulled up to the curb. Doors opened smoothly, one after another. Security moved with purpose now, forming a controlled perimeter. Kevin turned. She stepped out of the car calmly, sunlight catching the clean lines of her coat. Briella. She looked different, not transformed, revealed. Her posture was unhurried, her expression composed. She wore no jewelry beyond a simple watch, no dramatic gestures, just quiet authority. A folder rested under her arm, thick with the weight of decisions already made. The whispers intensified. "That's her. His wife. The one who did this." Kevin's breath caught. Briella didn't look at him right away. She spoke briefly with a man Kevin recognized from legal circles. Nodded once, then turned toward the building entrance. Security stepped aside instantly. The doors opened. She paused then, finally meeting Kevin's eyes across the distance. There was no anger in her gaze. No triumph. Just clarity. Kevin felt something collapse inside him as she walked forward, past the threshold that had just rejected him, the doors closing softly behind her. The sound echoed. Final. Briella wore white. Not the fragile white Kevin associated with apologies or surrender, but the sharp, deliberate, kind, clean lines, tailored precision, a color that didn't beg for forgiveness or hide stains. It caught the light as she moved. Turning heads without effort, Kevin saw her before he could stop himself. She crossed the lobby floor with unhurried confidence, the folder tucked beneath her arm thick enough to suggest permanence. The building responded to her in ways it never had to him, security stepping aside, doors opening without hesitation, quiet acknowledgement following her path. She belonged here now. Kevin stood at the edge of the sidewalk, separated from her by glass, guards, and a reality that had shifted without his consent. For a moment, he forgot the cameras, the murmurs, the loss. All he saw was her. Briella, he called out, his voice cutting through the air sharper than he intended. She stopped. Slowly, she turned. The noise around them dimmed, as if the city itself paused to listen. Kevin took a step forward. A guard's hand lifted instinctively, but Briella raised a single finger calm, precise, and the guard froze. The gesture was subtle, practiced, control without display. She faced Kevin fully now. Up close, she looked exactly as she always had, composed, observant, unreadable. If there was satisfaction in her eyes, it was so well contained it might have been mistaken for peace. You planned this, Kevin said, the accusation spilling out before he could restrain it. All of it. You waited. You set me up. Briella studied him for a moment. Not with anger, not even disappointment. With assessment. I didn't plan your choices, Kevin, she said evenly. I documented them. The words landed clean and devastating, slicing through the noise and lodging deep. Kevin shook his head, a hollow laugh escaping him. You think this makes you righteous? Ruining me? Taking everything? I didn't take anything, Briella replied. I reclaimed what was never meant to be misused. You destroyed my life, he said, his voice rising now, desperation seeping through the cracks of outrage. Briella's expression softened not with pity, but with something closer to clarity. No, she said quietly. I ended a lie. Kevin stepped closer again, his composure unraveling. I made you, he snapped. I gave you status. I gave you this life. Briella tilted her head slightly, as if considering the claim. You gave me proximity, she said. I gave you trust. The distinction hung between them, undeniable. Kevin's shoulders slumped. For the first time, the performance dropped entirely. I can fix this, he said. I'll step back. I'll make statements. We can settle privately. There is nothing left to settle, Briella replied. That's the difference between chaos and closure. He swallowed hard. You didn't have to do it this way. This way, she said, was the only way that ensured it would never happen again. Silence stretched between them, heavy and irrevocable. A man in a dark suit approached, clipboard in hand, eyes respectful but firm. Miss Horton, he said. The court order has been executed. Mr. Horton's access is officially revoked. Kevin closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, Briella was already turning away. Briella, he said, the word breaking now, stripped of anger. I have nowhere else to go. She paused. For a fleeting moment so brief it might have been imagined something flickered across her face. Not regret. Not doubt. Resolve. You have your freedom, she said softly. That's what you wanted. She walked past him then, heels clicking lightly against marble, the sound echoing through the space like punctuation. The doors opened for her without hesitation. As she crossed the threshold, Kevin stood frozen, the weight of finality pressing in from all sides. The cameras captured it, the stillness, the distance. the man left behind. The doors closed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just completely. Kevin Horton remained on the sidewalk, stripped not just of power but of narrative. The world moved on around him, indifferent now, uninterested. Inside the building, Briella Horton continued forward without looking back. The story no longer needed him. Kevin didn't remember deciding to walk. He only realized he was moving when the building was no longer behind him and the city had swallowed him whole. The sidewalk stretched ahead in dull gray slabs, familiar yet strangely hostile, as if Manhattan itself had quietly withdrawn its recognition. No guards followed him. No cameras cared anymore. He was just another man walking away from a place he no longer belonged. His phone felt useless in his hand. Notifications stacked endlessly, missed calls, messages he didn't open, alerts that no longer mattered. He stopped near a crosswalk and tried his credit card at a cafe out of reflex. The action automatic. Thoughtless. Declined. He stared at the terminal, blinking once, then again. The barista avoided his eyes. Kevin stepped back, murmured an apology he barely recognized as his own, and continued walking. The city felt different when it didn't answer to you. He noticed things he never had before. The impatience in strangers' faces, the sharp edge of morning air cutting through his coat, the way people walked past him without looking twice. There was no deference now, no instinctive pause when he entered a space. He passed a glass storefront and caught his reflection. It startled him. Without the context of power, he looked ordinary. Tired. Slightly hunched, as though gravity had increased overnight. The watch on his wrist gleamed uselessly, absurdly a relic from a life that no longer existed. Kevin kept walking. Memories surfaced uninvited, drifting through his mind with cruel clarity. Briella in the kitchen, early mornings, moving quietly so as not to wake him. Briella at events, standing just behind his shoulder, attentive without demanding credit. Briella listening while he talked, nodding at the right moments, never interrupting. He had called that support. He now recognized it as patience. He stopped at a corner he knew well, one he had crossed hundreds of times without thought. The light changed. People surged forward around him, brushing past without apology. He remained still for a moment too long, disoriented. For the first time, he let the truth surface fully. This hadn't happened to him. He had built it. Every dismissed question, every lie rehearsed in the mirror, every moment he assumed silence meant ignorance. He had mistaken her restraint for weakness because it suited him to believe it. Kevin exhaled slowly. There was no anger left, no energy for it. Just a hollow recognition settling in his chest. He had underestimated the wrong person. The city continued around him, indifferent and efficient. Somewhere, deals were being made, meetings held, lives rearranged without his input. Horton Dynamics would survive without him. Briella would thrive without him, and Kevin Horton would learn too late that power was never about noise or dominance. It was about awareness. He turned down a side street, footsteps echoing softly, carrying nothing with him now but the weight of consequence and the knowledge that the quiet woman he had overlooked had seen everything clearly from the beginning. Briella Horton woke to silence. Not the uneasy silence Kevin had mistaken for emptiness, but the kind that settles when everything is finally in its proper place. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of her new apartment, clean and unencumbered, touching surfaces that held only what she had chosen to keep. There were no compromises here, no half-lived routines, no careful adjustments made to preserve someone else's ego. She rose unhurriedly, wrapped herself in a robe, and stood for a moment at the window, watching the city begin again. Manhattan moved with the same relentless rhythm it always had, indifferent to individual rises and falls. Empires shifted quietly now, without Kevin Horton at their center. That, she thought, was the most honest outcome of all. Briella's days no longer revolved around anticipation, waiting for explanations, managing absences, smoothing over contradictions. The mental space Kevin had occupied for years had evaporated, leaving clarity in its wake. She reviewed documents at her dining table later that morning. The folder slimmer now, reduced to what remained necessary. Horton Dynamics no longer bore Kevin's imprint. His name faded from press coverage, mentioned only in footnotes and retrospective analysis. Former CEO, removed amid investigation. Era concluded. The narrative had moved on. And so had she. Briella didn't feel victorious. Victory implied conflict. What she felt instead was alignment. Her life, once lived in careful parallel to someone else's ambition, now followed its own trajectory. She accepted board invitations selectively, declined interviews entirely. She had no desire to explain herself to a world that had never bothered to look closely in the first place. Power, she had learned, did not require validation. Kevin Horton's story, by contrast, unraveled quietly. There were no redemption arcs, no dramatic comebacks. He became an example rather than a protagonist cited in discussions about governance, ethics, oversight. His absence did more than his presence ever had. It reminded people that no one was indispensable. The city forgot him quickly. That, more than the loss of wealth or access, was the true consequence. Briella never checked on him, not because she was indifferent, but because she understood finality. Some chapters did not require revisiting. Some endings were complete the moment they were written. She had not destroyed Kevin. She had stopped protecting him from himself, and in doing so, she reclaimed something far more valuable than status or control. She reclaimed authorship. In the quiet moments, those early mornings, she still cherished. Briella reflected on what had been misunderstood about her for so long. Silence had never meant submission. Restraint had never meant fear. Observation had always been her advantage. She had watched Kevin mistake noise for power, visibility for control, entitlement for invincibility. She had learned what he never did, that the loudest people are rarely the most dangerous. The most dangerous ones are listening. They don't argue. They don't threaten. They don't explain themselves endlessly in the hope of being understood. They wait. And when they act, the outcome feels sudden only to those who weren't paying attention. Briella closed the folder and set it aside. The chapter was finished. The story no longer needed revision. As she stepped back toward the window, the city reflected in the glass, calm and indifferent. She allowed herself a small, private smile, not of triumph, but of certainty. The most dangerous woman is not the loud one. It's the one who stops explaining. If this story resonated with you, like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on your notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. It helps us continue bringing you powerful stories of silence, strength, and consequence.